to next in terms of next steps? It will be, does the president try again? And what about the people who were harmed by these tariffs that have now been declared invalid?
All right, Jessica Levinson, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much. And for our viewers at home, we just want to let you know, as soon as the president steps before that podium, we'll bring it to you live right here on CBS News 24/7. While we await his words, let's continue the conversation from the policy and the political angle of today's ruling to really the economic implications. So let's talk to geoeconomics correspondent Aaron Delmore joining us live. Aaron, good to have you with us. So let's start with Wall Street, because so many of our 401ks are tied to what we see on the big board today. We're not seeing negative territory in any really huge reportable ways, but we're also not seeing a bump. How do you read that when we look through the lens of investor reaction to all of this?
Well, the investor reaction right now looks somewhat muted, and we can read that as seeing that investors somewhat expected this news. You know, this case has been pending for a long time, and it was largely assumed that this is where the Supreme Court would go, given how oral arguments went a couple of months ago. So make no mistake, we did see some wild swings this morning, and we've seen certain stocks up. But on the whole, despite those big swings over the last couple of hours, we're seeing stocks mildly in the green. You know, the Dow is about flat right now. The S&P is up around 0.4%. The NASDAQ up around 0.7%. And we could drill down into some of these if you like as well.
Yeah, let's do so. Go ahead, friend.
Yeah, so we're looking at stocks that are from companies impacted heavily by these tariffs. So let's take an example that everyone knows, Amazon. So many of Amazon's goods are imported from China. Well, as you can expect, this is good news for a company like Amazon, and we're seeing shares up around 2% today. Think about a company like Home Depot, building materials that are brought in, or even something like Lululemon. You know, if we look at sectors broadly, apparel is one of the ones that's really rising today, and that's because so many of our clothes come from countries like not only China, but India and Bangladesh and Thailand and Malaysia, a lot of countries that were hit hard by these tariffs. So if the tariffs aren't in effect, there could be some relief for some of these companies whose supply chains are tied up in other countries. But that said, we talked about a muted reaction. Well, investors largely assume that the Trump administration will try to find another way to put these tariffs into effect. That's also what we're seeing here, that not only was it a bit expected, but they do expect to see the Trump administration try to reapply these tariffs. All in all, that's why we're seeing a muted morning on Wall Street.
Well, and since you have an expertise in geopolitics and the geopolitical ramifications of this, are you seeing or hearing or even anticipating any reaction? I'm thinking about China. I'm also thinking about our neighbor to the north, Canada. Of course, we know it's been a very bumpy ride between President Trump and Canadian leaders. Any reaction there?
Absolutely. And it's not just that one-on-one relationship. These relationships reverberate. If the US and Canada are having a spat over trade, well, what does Canada do? What did Canada do? Look elsewhere for other trade partners. And that's why we're seeing a reshaping of the geoeconomic world order here. Not only has President Trump's signature economic policy been struck down today, this has been his biggest legal setback during his entire second term in office. That affects his negotiating power. And we've seen him use economic power to try to achieve means that are national security focused or politically focused in other countries. You know, he often says, well, if we can get another country to come to the table and make a deal, we'd rather do that. He's really trying to use economic tools here as either a bit of a bargaining chip or a bit of a cudgel, depending on how you look at it.
Right. You talk about bargaining chips, and what I also think about is something that drives a lot of investment on Wall Street, and that is chips, computer chips. And of course, we know that we talk about India, we talk about China when we talk about computer chips. And to your point about Canada starting to court some deals with China, do you see that those relationship building efforts will now go back to what they were, especially through the lens of those tech sectors and the microchips?
The big question that we're asking now is about the level of distrust in America's trade relationships. Is this something that can snap back into focus, renegotiating new deals under new parameters, or has the trust been eroded? And are other countries looking to diversify their economic relationships just because they think that they're more stable? You know, that's been a really big question, especially as we see trade reps meeting in all different parts of the world, and as we see how President Trump will move forward. Because remember, some of these tariffs, and I love that you brought up chips, are tied to what the president calls a national security imperative. He cast the steel and aluminum tariffs under that gaze as well. And anything he said was related to the fentanyl crisis. He also considers that a national security imperative. There are a lot of different things to unpack with these tariffs, and certainly we could spend all day doing so. But there is an economic imperative here to make more chips in the US or to restrict some high-powered chips from being for sale in China and other countries that the president thinks could be harmful to America's long-term national security interests. interests. That was
Well,
something that, by the way, President Biden was doing as well with the CHIPS Act. That's
yeah.
actually one issue that spans party lines.
Well, and as we await the president to speak, we are told in the next couple of minutes, what you just raised there is fascinating to me because we know he has what he calls a backup plan. You used the term national security. Could he hang his entire argument on that backup plan saying, look, we've got to have control over all of these chips from a standpoint of national security in order to make the argument and continue running the ball on tariffs?
Yeah, that's a question that I put to one of my sources who was in the U.S. Trade Rep's office during the first Trump administration. You know, it's not just one narrow tool, one narrow piece of the law that the president is using to craft this trade policy. There are a few different pieces of it. You know, I remember grilling him on the different sections that maybe could hold muster with the Supreme Court, maybe could not. When we see the Trump administration testing these legal limits, it's a very different look from the first term that the president served and from different presidencies that we've seen. This is what this administration wants to do. They want to test the limits of the law, especially when it comes to executive power. And so if, for instance, it's said that Congress needs to be a part of this kind of rulemaking, well, expect them to look at what Congress doesn't need to be a part of. And generally, national security imperatives tend to be something in the president's corner. Now, some of this was tested today, surely, but the president has different ways of imposing tariffs. And that's why we saw different things roll out at different times. I mean, you and I remember this. We saw the steel and aluminum tariffs, then we saw the automotive tariffs, and then we saw them based on the transit of fentanyl from Canada to the US and Mexico to the US and China to the US. And then we saw the broad-based country-specific tariffs. And that's what President Trump unveiled on April 2nd, which he called Liberation Day. He called those, you know, one for one, you know, retaliatory tariffs. He called them being kind of in lockstep with what other countries were doing. And he chalked that up to a national trade imbalance. He said that the U.S. was at a deficit, and he actually also cast that as a national emergency, the trade imbalances in the relationships between the U.S. and other countries' trade.
So as we await the president stepping before that microphone, I just want to sort of come out to the macro and talk about the president's legacy. Say his backup plans don't work. We don't know what they are. We don't know if they'll work. If they don't work, and if, given the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court justices today, mean that this tariff discussion is now done and dusted in the United States, how will history grade President Donald Trump relative to his tariff policy?
You know, a lot of times that reaction gets measured at first in the short term by everyday constituents. And while we will talk about the macro, and I'll get there with you, a lot of people are looking at their own kitchen table economics. And when they go to vote every 4 years, they think, is my family better off today than we were 4 years ago? And a lot of that will actually inform how the president's economic legacy unfolds. When people feel secure, they spend more money, and consumer spending powers 70% of the US economy. The reason why I bring it up to you is because potentially the government will have to reckon with what to do now with this decision by the Supreme Court, which could mean returning billions of dollars to the importers who paid these tariffs. Well, a study came out about a month ago saying that 96% of those costs were passed through to customers, to everyday Americans who made purchases. So not only is this going to be a terribly unwieldy process, which is something that Justice Brett Kavanaugh actually brought up in his dissent, it's going to be very hard to get the cat back in the bag there. And I think about a business owner who I interviewed this fall, who told me with tears in her eyes that they might not be able to make it into the next year. I touched base with her a week ago. Their store closed right before the holidays. For her, there will be no recourse. Her store is closed. She wasn't able to stay afloat and keep employing the people she's employed. So there are reverberations beyond this that just can't be repaired in some constituents' eyes. Meanwhile, if the government decides that it's easier just to send stimulus checks to Americans rather than try to put money in pockets from tariffs, that could make people feel somewhat rosy. It could also propel consumer spending and help float the economy in another way for a couple of weeks or months or even years. So we don't know yet. You know, people are going to look at the state of the economy, which is more than just how the stock market is performing, on his last days in office to really get a full picture of how this unfolded.
You know, you really paint a powerful picture of the business owners who had to close their doors, but there are also other businesses who had a little more fat on the bone, so to speak, to be able to endure the impacts of these tariffs. When you think about those business owners, a lot of them had to raise their prices to sort of readjust, and that was passed on to the U.S. consumer. What does the business community do now? If tariffs are now a thing of the past, and we don't think that they're going to be, the president's obviously going to try other strategies here, but do you anticipate that businesses who did survive will lower their prices once again? You talk about putting the cat back in the bag. Pricing is also hard to put back in the bag.
Absolutely. And the reason why I'm smiling is because we so often see prices go up. How often do we see prices go down?
Not to my memory.
Correct. We often see it around the holiday period. You know, I was recently in your studio and we were talking about consumer price inflation. Well, December is always going to be a month where consumer prices come in a little bit lower because of those holiday sales. But aside from that example, we really don't see it. What companies tend to do is they tend to keep prices elevated or maybe stagnant. They tend to pull in that cash, and amid uncertainty, they tend to hold on to it. We also see during periods of uncertainty, businesses hire a bit less, and that can lead to what we've been calling this frozen job market, where workers don't really feel like they have the upper hand anymore. So they're staying put in the jobs that they have. You don't see a lot of transition or movement, and that means that it's harder for people to get jobs, whether they're newly entering the workforce or whether they've been unemployed. That kind of a frozen job market isn't something that, for instance, the Federal Reserve really likes to see, because another thing that companies do amid uncertainty is they try to hold on to capital by cutting their workforce and actually losing their workers, laying off or firing people. So these are things that more than you and me, right, more than business owners, more than economists are looking at. The Fed is digesting all of this because when prices stay elevated, that contributes to higher inflation. And the Fed, of course, is trying to bring inflation down to what they call their 2% target. They're also trying to balance that with any risks to the labor side of the economy, employment. If they start to see unemployment ticking up, that makes it harder for them to use their tools to fight inflation. And all of this matters because people like you and me take out loans on our houses and our cars.
Right.
It affects how much we pay. And so when capital is cheaper, when borrowing money is cheaper, people tend to spend more. Let's complete the circle here. That means that companies spend more money too, hiring more people. That gives workers more money in their pockets to go out and spend. So none of this, absolutely none of this occurs in a vacuum.
Everything's connected, and in the end, it affects the American consumer and the American voter. Erin, thank you so much. Fascinating
Anytime.
Conversation. I look forward to having you back here on CBS News 24/7. All right, so once again, firing up our live cameras right there at the White House, where we await President Donald Trump's reaction to that U.S. Supreme Court sweeping decision, essentially wiping out President Trump's work on tariffs, at least from the lens of the strategy he tried the first time. That ruling, essentially, President Donald Trump does not have the authority to impose tariffs that have been the hallmark of something that helped to get him elected, and that's his economic policy. If you are just now joining us, let's do a little bit of a level set here and get you caught up on what's happened with legal and political reporter Katrina Kaufman. Okay, so Katrina, let's start here. 6-3 decision. Walk our viewers through who might be just taking a lunch break right now and who are logging on and listening in. What happened?
So yes, we have this 6-3 decision. Of course, the key takeaway here is that Trump cannot use the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs, a key tenet of his administration, as you were saying, a key proposal that he campaigned on for president. The president has called this decision a disgrace. He says he has a backup plan, and we do know that there are a number of possible.
Wow, that's a lot of people. The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs
First public reaction
is
to the Supreme
deeply
Court's striking
disappointing,
down most of his tariffs.
and I'm
Let's
ashamed
listen in.
of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. I'd like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh for their strength and wisdom and love of our country, which is right now very proud of those justices. When you read the dissenting opinions, there's no way that anyone can argue against them. There's no way. Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy. And they're dancing in the streets, but they won't be dancing for long, that I can assure you. The Democrats on the court are thrilled, but they will automatically vote no. They're an automatic no, just like in Congress. They're an automatic no. Their against anything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again. They also are a, frankly, disgrace to our nation, those justices. They're an automatic no, no matter how good a case you have. It's a no. But you can't knock their loyalty. It's one thing you can do with some of our people. Others think they're being politically correct, which has happened before far too often with certain members of this court, and it's happened so often with this court. What a shame. Having to do with voting in particular, when in fact they're just being fools and lapdogs for the rhinos and the radical left Democrats, and not that this should have anything at all to do with it. They're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. It's my opinion that the court has been swayed by foreign interests and a political movement that is far smaller than people would ever think. It's a small movement. I won by millions of votes. We won in a landslide. With all the cheating that went on, there was a lot of it, but we still won in a landslide. Too big to rig. But these people are obnoxious, ignorant, and loud. They're very loud. And I think certain justices are afraid of that. They don't want to do the right thing. They're afraid of it. This was an important case to me, more as a symbol of economic national security, and also, I would say, just for our country itself, so important, because we're doing so well as a country. We've never done so well. The good news is that there are methods, practices, statutes, and authorities, as recognized by the entire court in this terrible decision, and also as recognized by Congress, which they refer to, that are even stronger than the IEEPA tariffs available to me as President of the United States. And in actuality, I was very modest in my ask of other countries and businesses because I wanted to do, and it's very important, I wanted to be very well behaved because I wanted to do anything, I didn't want to do anything that would affect the decision of the court, because I understand the court. I understand how they are very easily swayed. I want to be a good boy. I have very effectively utilized tariffs over the past year to make America great again. Our stock market has just recently broken 50,000 on the Dow, and simultaneously, and even more amazingly, broken 7,000 on the S&P, two numbers that everybody thought upon our landslide election victory could not be attained. Think of that. Nobody thought it was possible to do it within 4 years, and we did it in 1 year. They said, you'll never be able, you'll go back and you read the geniuses, read their statements, all of the Nobel Prize winners in economics. They said, no, you couldn't do it in 4 years. Well, we didn't do it in 4 years. We did it in 1 year. We broke every record in the book, and we're continuing to do so. Tariffs have likewise been used to end 5 of the 8 wars that I settled. I settled 8 wars, whether you like it or not, including India, Pakistan, big ones, nuclear, could have been nuclear. Prime Minister of Pakistan said yesterday at the great meeting that we had, the Peace Board, he said yesterday that President Trump could have saved 35 million lives by getting us to stop fighting. They were getting ready to do some bad things. But they've given us great national security, these tariffs have. And together with our strong borders, reduced fentanyl coming into our country by 30%. When I use them as a penalty against countries illegally sending this poison into our country to poison our youth, all of those tariffs remain. They all remain. I don't know if you know that or not. They all remain. We're still getting them, and we will after the decision. I guess there's nobody left to appeal to. But again, those 3 people, such respect. I've had a lot of respect for them anyway, but such great respect. But other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly
Test on mic
rejected.
2. Test on mic 2.
We have
Testing mic 2.
alternatives.
1, 2.
Great alternatives.
I have
Could be
the
more
mics
money.
down.
We'll take in more money.
Testing
and we'll
1 2
be a
on
lot
mic 2.
stronger for it. We're taking in hundreds of billions of dollars.
Okay.
We'll continue to do so. To show you how ridiculous the opinion is, however,
Test 1
the
2
court
3
said
1
that
2
I'm not
3
allowed
mic
to
2.
charge even $1. I can't charge $1. Can't charge $1.
Mic 3.
I would have used 1 penny, but we don't make the pennies anymore. We save money. Can't charge $1 to any country under IEPA. Not $1. I assume to protect other countries. This must have been done to protect those other countries, certainly not the United States of America, which they should be interested in protecting. That's what they're supposed to be protecting. But I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country. I'm even allowed to impose a foreign country destroying embargo. I can embargo. I can do anything I want, but I can't charge $1. Because that's not what it says. And that's not the way it even reads. I can do anything I want to do to them, but I can't charge any money. So I'm allowed to destroy the country, but I can't charge them a little fee. I could give them a little two-cent fee, but I cannot charge under any circumstances. I cannot charge them anything. Think of that. How ridiculous is that? I'm allowed to embargo them. I'm allowed to tell them you can't do business in the United States anymore. We want you out of here. But if I want to charge them $10, I can't do that. It's incorrect. Their decision's incorrect. But it doesn't matter because we have very powerful alternatives that have been approved by this decision. You know, they've been approved by the decision for those that thought they had us. And they're saying that I have the absolute right to license, but not the right to charge a license fee. So think of that. I have the right to license, which is a very powerful word. In many ways, license is more powerful than tariffs. In fact, I was thinking about using it. But they came up with the idea that I can license, just like the people that were opposing me told them to do, but not the right to charge a license fee. Think of that. Who ever heard of such a thing? What license has ever been issued without the right to charge a fee? You get a license, you charge a fee. It's automatic, but not with this court. But now the court has given me the unquestioned right to ban all sorts of things from coming into our country, to destroy foreign countries, but a much more powerful right than many people ever thought we even had, but not the right to charge a fee. How crazy is that? Our country is the hottest country anywhere in the world right now. And it was a dead country 1.5 years ago under an incompetent president. But now I'm going to go in a different direction, probably the direction that I should have gone the first time, but I read the language. I'm very good at reading language, and it read our way 100%, but now I'll go the way I could have gone originally, which is even stronger than our original choice. As Justice Kavanaugh, whose stock has gone so up, you have to see, I'm so proud of him, wrote in his dissent, although I firmly disagree with the court's holding today, the decision might not substantially constrain a president's ability to order tariffs going forward. So, think of that. The decision might not substantially constrain. And it doesn't, he's right. In fact, I can charge much more than I was charging. So I'm going to just start. Although I firmly disagree with the court's holding today, the decision might not substantially constrain a president's ability to order tariffs going forward. That's because numerous other federal statutes, which is so true, authorize the president to impose tariffs and might justify most, if not all, of the tariffs issued in this case. Even more tariffs, actually. Those statutes include, think of that, those statutes include, for example, the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, Section 232. All of these things I know so well. The Trade Act of 1974, Sections 122, 201, 301. And the Tariff Act of 1930, Section 338, all clear. But it's a little bit longer process. I thought I'd make things simple, but they didn't let us do that. I would like to thank Justice Kavanaugh for frankly, his genius and his great ability. Very proud of that appointment. In actuality, while I am sure that they did not mean to do so, the Supreme Court's decision today made a president's ability to both regulate trade and impose tariffs more powerful and more crystal clear rather than less. I don't think they meant that. I'm sure they didn't. It's terrible. And to think that the Democrats who oppose this only because they want to go the opposite way, they'd like to pack the court. They want to put on 21 people. They want to pack the court, pack the Supreme Court. Maybe they should do it. Maybe they would be better off if they did it. They want to pack the court. They want to do anything to hurt our country. There will no longer be any doubt, and the income coming in and the protection of our companies and country will actually increase because of this decision. I don't think the court meant that, but it's the way it is. Based on long-standing law and hundreds of victories, and even, as I was pointed out before, even thousands of victories over the years, to the contrary, the Supreme Court did not overrule tariffs. They merely overruled a particular use of IEEPA tariffs. And essentially, it's used to get a fee. I can do anything I want with IEEPA, anything. I just can't charge anybody for it. I can license, I just can't charge them. It's ridiculous, but it's okay because we have other ways, numerous other ways. The ability to block, embargo, restrict, license, or impose any other condition on a foreign country's ability to conduct trade with the United States under IEEPA has been fully confirmed by this decision. So now there's no doubt, because, you know, there were a lot of questions about tariffs because no president was smart enough to use them to protect our country from those countries and businesses that were ripping us off. You took a look at the deficits that we had with some of these countries. It was disgraceful what they got away with for many, many decades. But now we know, because this decision affirms all those things that some people weren't sure about. In order to protect, and it says so, in order to protect our country, a president can actually charge more tariffs than I was charging in the past period of a year under the various tariff authorities. So we can use other of the statutes, other of the tariff authorities, which have also been confirmed and are fully allowed. Therefore, effective immediately, all national security tariffs under Section 232 and existing Section 301 tariffs, they're existing, they're there, remain in place, fully in place, and in full force and effect. Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122 over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and I say quite simply, which I've said for a long time, make America great again. And interestingly, we've already made it great, so I don't have to use that, but I don't think we'll ever give up on MAGA. MAGA is always going to be with us. If you have a few questions, you can let us know. But just to end, so we're going forward, we will be able to take in more money, and there'll no longer be doubt, because there was always doubt. I know the people that brought the lawsuit, and you know, they're sleazebags, major sleazebags, but I know them, and they're foreign country centric. They were sending things into our country, and the people representing them knew full well, but they were sending things into our country, and they were beneficial to other countries, but very, very bad for us. And I stopped it, and we'll just keep it going. So we have we have a totally firm decision now, and I don't think the court meant it, because the court doesn't show great spirit toward our country, in my opinion. A lot of bad decisions, but There are usually ways around it. This is something we could have done, as Justice Kavanaugh said, we could have done this originally, but we're doing it now. And the numbers could be far greater than the hundreds of billions we've already taken in. Yeah, please.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm very curious. You've
Why didn't
spoken
call
about
you in the red?
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Justice Thomas and Alito, as you know, are the most conservative constitutional justices. Do you think that you'll get to appoint 2 more justices later this term with similar ideologies? And what type of vetting process will they go through to ensure they uphold
I don't know, but they're great
Constitution?
justices. That's all I can say. And I hope they're going to be around a long time. I hope they're going to stay healthy. They're great people. They're great. And Justice Alito, too, to add to the group. These are great men.
Right.
They're with a great love of our country and a great understanding of the law.
Mr. President, are you going to ask Congress to take additional action on tariffs now? Have you
No, I don't
spoken
need to.
your
It's already been approved. I mean, I would ask Congress and probably get it. When people look at the real numbers, and you look at hundreds of billions of dollars that have come into our country. Yesterday, I was at a steel plant, as you know, and I went to great place, great plant, great, wonderful people. And they were telling me, I said to them, you were there, a lot of the press in this room. Of course, I don't think this plane's big enough to take the press in this room, but a lot of the press right here. We were in Georgia. And I said to the owner, I made a speech at a factory. They make steel products. And I said, how are you? Nice to meet you. How's business? President, I'd love to kiss you. This is a very powerful man. I don't want to be kissed by that man, but a very powerful, strong man. He's been in the steel business for many years. His father started it. And he said, sir, I want to kiss you. I said, why? He said, because we were down to working 1 hour a week, and then you came in and imposed tariffs, and all of that foreign junk that they were dropping into our country stopped. And we're now going to double shifts, 7 days a week, and we may be very soon going to 24 hours around the clock, almost 7 days a week. He said, sir, I want to kiss you so badly. And I said, no, thank you. But you know what? He just to finalize it, he said, oh, this is a great place in Georgia. He said, all up and down the highway, same exact answer, sir. We're all going out of business. We're going to go bankrupt. We're all going out of business. And now every one of us are thriving, and we're hiring people like we haven't. He said, like I've never, and he's been in business for, I think, 45 years, like we've never hired before. That's because of tariffs. And we're going to keep it going the same way. And you're going to start to see the results in a year from now when all those factories start that are under construction right now. You see all the construction numbers are so good. Those construction workers are building factories that are going to be open, including not only AI, which is big, but car plants coming in from Canada, who ripped us off for 30% of our market. Mexico ripped us off for a big portion. Over the years, they've taken our market. They've taken our cars. They manufacture them in Japan, Germany, and all over the place because nobody's standing in this position. The position I have as President of the United States had the insight, the courage, well, I don't know what it is, to charge tariffs. You can make your product outside. You can put our people out of business. You can put everybody on the unemployment rolls. But if you're going to make a car in some other country, you're going to pay a 15, 20, 30% tariff. And those things would have never happened. We wouldn't have lost our business. Same thing with, as an example, Taiwan. Taiwan came in. They stole our chip business. They make chips. For 30 years longer, they made chip. And they put our companies, Intel would be now the largest company. I saved Intel. I literally saved it at the beginning of this administration. And now all those companies in Taiwan are building factories in Arizona, Texas, and various other places because they don't want to pay tariffs. They're all pouring into the United States. But just like that great patriot said yesterday, sir, what you've done, nobody thought was possible. And Steve Moore, a highly respected economist, came into my office yesterday. He said, you've done something nobody's ever done. 22 Nobel Prize winners in economics said we would right now be in a recession. And you said, no, we're going to have a booming country. We're going to have a booming country. You were right. All 22 were wrong, and you were right. This country is booming. and it's booming because of the election on November 5th, and it's booming for another reason. It's booming because of tariffs. Yeah, please, go ahead.
You said ahead of this decision that if the Supreme Court
please,
ruled...
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. What will you say to foreign nations who seek to renegotiate their deals? And what did you mean a moment ago when you said that the Supreme Court has been swayed by foreign interests?
Well, I think that foreign interests are represented by people that I believe have undue influence. They have a lot of influence over the Supreme Court, whether it's through fear or respect or friendships, I don't know. But I know some of the people that were involved on the other side, and I don't like them. I think they're real slime balls. And got to do what's right for the country. You got to do what's right for the Constitution. That's why I respect so much Justice Thomas and Alito, Kavanaugh, because they not only dissented, their dissent is so strong. When you read their dissent, you know, a lot of times you'll read a dissent and it's like, well, you don't know, it could go either way. There's no other way. The good news is, it's like Justice Kavanaugh said, very strongly said, you have other ways you can go. You don't have to go that way. You can go other way. There are numerous other ways you can go. And frankly, this should have been done by presidents many years ago. They allowed our country to be eaten alive. We lost 50% of our car business. We used to make cars. We made all the cars. And then Mexico came, Canada came, and Japan and Germany. But they're all coming back now. They're all coming back at record levels. No, you please. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking. I don't talk to CNN. It's fake news. Go ahead.
Mr. President, yesterday you made the case that the economy is the hottest it's been in a long time.
Right.
January jobs report beat expectations, CPI report beat expectation, real wages are up. What would you tell Americans who are worried that this decision will kind of throw the economy that you have projected going in the right direction at a very rapid pace off track?
Well, thank you for the question. And I will say this, we really are at a very important point. I've been waiting for this decision so long. They could have made this decision a long time ago. Not complex. They're wrong on it. It's a ridiculous decision. But they should have released this a long time ago. We waited months. And that gave uncertainty. Now we have certainty. And I think you're going to see the country get much stronger because of it. Look, we were ripped off by almost every country in the world. If you look at the surpluses, almost every country in the world that did business with us, our people were stupid. And I blame presidents for it because they're ultimately the leader. We were being ripped off by almost every single country in the world, had some massive surpluses. China had hundreds of billions of dollars in surpluses with the United States. They rebuilt China. They rebuilt the army. We built China's army by allowing that to happen. I have a great relationship with President Xi, but he respects our country now. Now, what we've done, I charged China a 20% tariff as a penalty for sending fentanyl in. And that was 20 times more than they could make by selling fentanyl. And I said, you know, at some point you're going to say, like, and they have reduced it. You know, fentanyl is down by more than 30% coming into our country. Part of that is our strong border. We have a strong border now. But thank you. Thank you for your question.
Mr. President, sir, you warned once in a social media post that if the Supreme Court did this, shot down your tariffs, the U.S. would be, quote, financially defenseless. Are we financially defenseless right now?
No, because we're doing something in a different way. We're doing something in a very powerful way, and we're using things that some people thought we should have used in the first place. But it's more complicated. It's a little more complicated. The process takes a little more time, but the end result is going to get us more money, and I think it's going to be great. Yeah, please. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, President Trump. So, since Liberation Day, there's about $175 billion in tariff revenue that is now in limbo. Do you have to refund $175 billion?
Think of it, Peter. Very fair question. They take months and months to write an opinion, and they don't even discuss that point. We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars, not millions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And so I said, well, what happens to all the money that we took in? It wasn't discussed. Wouldn't you think they would have put one sentence in there saying that keep the money or don't keep the money, right? I guess it has to get litigated for the next 2 years. So they write this terrible, defective decision, totally defective. It's almost like not written by smart people. And what they do, they don't even talk about that. Your question is very basic. That was the first question I asked also to make you feel good. I said, what about all the money that we've taken in? Sir, they don't discuss that. How crazy is that?
What you're saying is, are you saying that you don't plan to honor refunds for companies that file for them?
I just told you the answer, right? I told you the answer. It's not discussed. We'll end up being in court for the next 5 years. Go ahead, Green.
Thank you, Mr. President. When you are talking about the relationship with countries that you have sought trade deals with, do you anticipate that they will seek to renegotiate those? What do you say to them? And do you view this as a potential undermining power for your
We're
negotiations?
going straight ahead with 10% straight across the board, which was the absolute right to do. And that's taking place. That's a lot of money coming into our country. And then during that period of about 5 months, we are doing the various investigations necessary to put fair tariffs or tariffs, period, on other countries. So we're doing that period, but we're immediately instituting the 10% provision, which we're allowed to do. And in the end, I think we'll take in more money than we've taken in before.
Mr. President, you've used the tariff revenue to pay for a host of federal policies. You claim that they will pay for them. What happens
Well,
to
like
those
the
things?
farmers, we took care of farmers. You know, the farmers were mistreated by foreign countries very badly, very, very badly. And last week I gave them $12 billion out of tariff money. We intend to, out of tariff money, because just so you understand, we have tariffs. We just have them in a different way. And now they've been confirmed by the Supreme Court of the United States. So there's no longer that question out there about tariffs. And we'll be taking in hundreds of billions of dollars. And countries that have treated us badly will have to pay a price for treating us badly. And countries that have been good to us will be treated very well. We just left the top person in a place called Vietnam, just left my office. Great gentleman, strong and smart. He said, you know, I think this means you're allowed to charge us more tariffs than before. And Canada said to Jameson, I might want to say it, Jameson, but Canada said, I hope you win this decision, because if you don't win, you'll actually be allowed to charge us with a little additional work, higher tariffs. Jameson, you want to comment on that?
Yes, sir. So to the President's point, we have a lot of tools out there. We have Section 122, which will be implemented today. It will be signed today and implemented very shortly. We have Section 301 investigations, which are incredibly legally durable, where we can investigate and address unfair trading practices that have led to our huge trade deficit. And so you can look forward in the coming days and weeks to seeing all of that come out, and we're going to keep continuity in the program. We're going to keep addressing this so that the deficit can keep going down. That's the trend it has, and we can make America great again.
No.
Several of Republicans in Congress have supported this decision by the Supreme Court, and Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, has called you a wannabe king. Why wouldn't
him a low IQ?
But why wouldn't
he doesn't even know? And I watched him the other day interview. The guy doesn't even know what a tariff is.
But there's been bipartisan criticism.
No, not bipartisan.
Of the tariffs.
Excuse me.
There's several
A few
Republicans
people.
have said that.
Yeah, a few people.
Wouldn't you just work with Congress to come up with a plan?
I don't have to.
To push tariffs.
I have the
through?
right to do tariffs, and I've always had the right to do tariffs. And it's all been approved by Congress, so there's no reason to do it. All we're doing is we're going through a little bit more complicated process. Not complicated very much, but a little more complicated than what we had. We'll be able to take in tariffs, more tariffs. And the Congress people and the Congress.
Down the Canadian tariffs last week.
Yeah,
There's been votes in the Senate against it.
Yeah, because we lost 2 Republicans or 3 Republicans because they're not good Republicans. What you don't say, you don't say that we got 215 votes.
You need 218 for something to pass.
Yeah, sure we do. We might have lost 3 votes, and we got. And what was the score on the Republican side? 215 to 3, right? But you don't say that. We have great unity. There's great unity in the Republican Party, and I hope everyone's going to vote Republican, because otherwise you won't have a country left, because these people have been destroying. They are destroying our country. Please.
Mr. President, the 122 tariffs, that 10%,
Yeah.
Is that going to be for 150 days, or do you want to charge that indefinitely?
We have a right to do pretty much what we want to do, but we're going to charge it starting effectively. I think it's 3 days from now. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, you speak to a lot of factory workers, a lot of manufacturing workers. What does the Supreme Court ruling say? What's that message to those factory workers?
Well, I think the factory workers are happy because we're now telling them that they're going to look. The man I met with yesterday, who owned a factory, was out of business. He was out of business. And now he's employing 5 times. In fact, I walked in, he's got a brand new crane. I said, how old is that crane? We got it in December. He's allowed to write it off in 1 minute. The Great Big Beautiful Act gave no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. He said this great big beautiful bill, frankly, has been the best thing that's ever happened for the workers of the, much more so than for rich people. The only thing it does for rich people, it allows them to hire a lot more people. But when I saw him, and then he said, it's all up and down the line. This is a place in Georgia, all up and down, other factories doing different, not only steel products, different. He said, every one of us was out of business. We could barely make it. Some of them were down to less than an hour a week. Think of it, 1 hour a week to make just a few little trinkets or whatever they make. Now they're going round the clock. I had it a month ago. I went to Michigan, went to Ford, and I met with Bill Ford, the head of Ford, and we were in one of the biggest plants, an original plant from the early 1900s, where, by the way, I might add this, it's not really relevant, but it's all relevant. Murders are down the lowest since 1900, around the time that he had this plant. That's 125 years. We have the lowest murder rate. Okay. And our crime is way down in the country. The factories that we're talking about, the people that we're talking about, they are so thrilled with Trump. So whether we charge IEEPA tariffs or whether we charge tariffs under a different section, that's what we're going to be doing. There's no way we can lever. This is what happened to our country. This is why we owe $38 trillion, which we'll get rid of in pretty good course. We have a very incompetent Fed chairman who likes high interest rates. For political reasons, he likes them. But we're going to have somebody very good. Interest rates should come down very substantially. I think we should pay the lowest interest rates on the planet. There should be no country, and we don't do that. We're number 38. This is just bad policy for a long period of time. But what's happened is we've made America strong again. We've made America great again. We should pay. As an example, the country of Switzerland, we were getting almost no tariffs from them. We had a $40 billion deficit. And the prime minister called me up. She said, but we are a small country, because I said we're going to raise it to 39% from nothing. That would have rendered them not very successful, as opposed to right now they're considered elite. But if we put a tariff, they would, and I realized then, she said, but sir, we are a small country. I said, you're a small country with a big deficit. For us, you're making a lot of money off the United States. If we do that, a lot of these elite countries, they're elite because we let them make so much money. And I want them to do well, but I don't want them to do well on the backs of the American taxpayer. So I appreciate your question. I think it's a reasonable answer.
You've been listening to President Donald Trump with his first public reaction to this major Supreme Court ruling this morning, deeming illegal the president's sweeping global tariffs. There's a lot that we just heard. We've got Jan Crawford standing by for the legal side of things, but I want to begin with our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. Major, the first portion of that address we just heard really laid into the justices in the majority opinion that deemed these tariffs unconstitutional. What stood out to you?
Well, the president called that decision from the Supreme Court deeply disappointing, said he was ashamed of some members of the Supreme Court, said they were fools, lapdogs, rhinos. That means Republicans in name only. Obnoxious was another word he used to describe this opinion. It's worth pointing out that 2 of the justices that sided against the president, Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, nominated by President Trump, confirmed by his allies in the United States Senate. So there's that. Also, the president said this doesn't change all that much because he has other authorities. Of course, Critics of the way he had proceeded on tariffs had been long telling him that. And in his first term, the president used those authorities to put together tariffs. So whether or not this changes anything dramatically or not, that awaits to be seen. The authorities the president talked about on the tariff front exist. They take longer. They have more limits on their scope and duration, but they are there. They've always been there. But the president chose to use this particular law and expansively interpreted his presidential power to do tariffs. Now the Supreme Court has said, no, you cannot use this power that particular way. The tariff conversation isn't over, but what the president was doing in much of his remarks, not only criticizing the court, which is an ongoing institution with which he has many matters unrelated to this still pending, keep an eye on that, but also going back to a very strong, held, and politically resonant topic in this country. Globalization has been a net negative for Americans, particularly middle-class Americans, and he alone is fighting on their behalf, and he will use tariffs in whatever mechanism he deems necessary to try to rebalance the scales that he believes globalization tipped against his most ardent supporters.
Yeah, that was clear. He did win the election. He seemed to believe, based on his comments, that meant he also won the Supreme Court, but that is, of course, not the case. Let's go to our chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford. Jan, the president said he had alternatives to this ruling today, great alternatives. What might they be?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of laid those out in those remarks. And Justice Brett Kavanaugh, another of President Trump's nominees to the court, wrote the primary dissent and kind of outlined that while this case, as he said, meant Trump, the holding of this case meant that Trump couldn't turn to the specific federal law, an emergency statute. There were other laws that just had a few additional procedural steps that an emergency statute didn't require. So in other words, yes, Trump does have these other alternatives, but it's going to take a little longer, and he doesn't have a lot of patience for this. And there's also kind of a cabining of them. They can't just go on indefinitely, specifically one of the ones that he mentioned. So he's got to jump through a few more hoops now, and that's not what he wanted to do, which is why he went with this other sweeping law that he argued authorized almost unbounded authority to impose tariffs on every one of our trading partners. That is what the court rejected today. That one statute, you saw 6 justices in the majority, 3 conservatives, 2 of whom were Trump appointees, and 3 liberals coming together for different reasons to reach the same conclusion, that this emergency statute does not authorize these sweeping tariffs, which Trump had argued that it did. The dissenting justices said they thought it did, and they thought Trump had the better argument. But whatever, at the end of the day, Trump does have other alternatives. It's just going to be a little more complicated for him to do it, which he did not want to do. No, he didn't, Jen. Thank you very much. We've been monitoring the stock market, which is up at the moment. To explain that reaction and what this new tariffs, this new ruling may mean for tariffs going forward, and the small business picture, the employment picture, I want to go to our CBS News senior business and technology correspondent, Jolene Kemp. Jolene, the market doesn't like uncertainty, but this ruling doesn't seem to be certain, at least the way the president is spinning it now.
Yeah, you saw the markets pop into the green just slightly, not a major dramatic move here. But what a lot of people are talking to me about right now, from small businesses to policymakers in Washington, is this Section 122 that the president says he is going to sign, a 10% new global tariff under this 122, which is in the Trade Act of 1974. And he says he wants to start that 3 days from now. So what is that exactly? That basically gives the president the ability to impose a tariff without what they call prior investigation. That means he could act very fast to make this happen, basically giving him a new emergency tool to address what he calls a trade crisis here. So the catch here is that that is actually capped at 15%. And it can only last for up to 150 days. So the small business owners I've been talking to, for example, the CEO of Simplified, that planner and stationery company, she is telling me that she believes that if the 10% tariff it hits its limit, she's expecting another major legal battle that could potentially go to the Supreme Court as well. And on the issue of refunds, will businesses get refunds given the SCOTUS decision? The president was not specific. He would not answer clearly if he would issue or hold back refunds. All he said was 5 years of court battles, and that has small businesses telling me that they think the president wants to crush them versus the big businesses getting a lot of the exemptions. Tony.
Yeah, this is not over. Jolene, thank you very much. We're going to leave it there. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, on your local news, and of course tonight with me on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Tony DeCopel.
You're watching CBS News 24/7. I'm Lindsay Reiser. Let's take you back to the White House where the president is still taking questions.
You look at Hungary, you look at Poland, Czech, Slovakia. There are some countries that have gone very much the opposite, some really, and some others. But Europe has to be strong, and they become soft and not recognizable. You go into some of the countries, I don't want to be specific, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about, and they're not recognizable. They become, the environmentalists have taken over. They've got windmills destroying their fields and their beautiful meadows and their oceans, and they're paying a fortune. Now, Europe has to get smart. Europe's getting killed on two things, energy and immigration. And if they don't solve both of them fast, Europe is not the same place. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, Justices Gorsuch and Barrett, are you surprised in particular by their decision today? And do you regret nominating them?
I don't want to say whether or not I regret. I think their decision was terrible. Yeah. I think it's an embarrassment to their families. You want to know the truth? The two of them. Yeah.
Specifically on that $2,000 tariff check.
Mr. President,
I didn't call you.
You didn't call me?
Yeah, Mr. President, to be clear, do you believe at the end of implementing these new tariff tools, the tariff rate and tariffs will ultimately be higher than they currently are?
Potentially higher.
How much higher?
It depends, whatever we want them to be. But we want them to be fair for other countries. And, you know, we have some countries that have treated us really badly for years, and it's going to be high for them. And we have other countries that have been very good, and it's going to be very reasonable for them. Yeah.
Specifically on the tariffs question, I mean on the $2,000.
I didn't call you.
Mr. President, thank you, Mr. President. Do you have any plans to travel to India for the Quad Summit, and how do you think your relationship with India is right now?
I think my relationship with India is fantastic, and we're doing trade with India. India pulled out of Russia. You know, India was getting its oil from Russia, right? And they pull way back at my request because we want to settle that horrible war where 25,000 people are dying every month. And my relationship with Prime Minister Modi is, I would say, great. I also stopped a war between India and Pakistan, as you know. There were 10 planes we shot down. That war was going, and probably going nuclear. And just yesterday, the Prime Minister of Pakistan said President Trump saved 35 million lives by getting them to stop. That's and I did it largely with tariffs. I said, look, you're going to fight, that's fine, but you're not going to do business with the United States, and you're going to pay a 200% tariff, each country. And they called up and they said, we have made peace. Okay? I just want to thank you all. Look, great certainty has been brought back to the economy of the United States, and actually the economy of the world, because we generate so much in the world. We're the biggest in the world, and we're now the strongest by far. We were a country that was dead 1.5 years ago. Now we have the hottest country in the world. We're going to keep it that way. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
We've been watching President Trump speak. He has been talking about his reaction to the Supreme Court tariff ruling today, in which the Supreme Court struck down really this core economic message, a pillar of his administration. I believe that we're continuing with our coverage, correct? All right, let's go ahead now and go to CBS News White House correspondent Willie James Inman, who joins us from the White House. So, Willie, I guess one of the big headlines, in addition to how unhappy the president was with this ruling and some of his scathing remarks against the justices, is what he is going to use instead to sort of skirt around this issue that he's not allowed to use IEPA, the Emergency Powers Act, to impose these levies.
Lindsay, the president calling this a ridiculous decision and blasting those Supreme Court justices who sided against his emergency powers that he used, IEPA, as you described it, those emergency powers for sweeping tariffs across the board in large part against U.S. allies, in some cases foes. We know that the president, he certainly did not like this decision, jokingly referring to the State of the Union when you typically have all of the justices seated there on Capitol Hill, along with lawmakers saying essentially that they are barely invited to his State of the Union speech that is set to happen on Tuesday next week. Well, in terms of the president's announcement, he announced this 10% across the board tariff for 5 months on goods around the world, in large part to essentially go back to what he's been doing all along, to announce those sweeping tariffs that he says, in terms of those trade relations with other nations around the world, is unfair. He's simply he talked about the powers that he's going to use. Specifically, he's referring to Section 122 of the Trade Act, which calls for the president to powers that he can use to enact tariffs. In large part, those tariffs are limited, though, up to 15%, maximum of 150 days. So those two limits, 15%, 150 days. So the president likely going to be limited in terms of that potential power unless he gets the power to, of course, the input from Congress. Now, I do want to play some sound from the president when he talked about the tariffs and the situation that happened with the Supreme Court and his reaction there. Listen.
I don't think the court meant it, because the court doesn't show great spirit toward our country, in my opinion. A lot of bad decisions, but there are usually ways around it. This is something we could have done, as Justice Kavanaugh said, we could have done this originally, but we're doing it now. And the numbers could be far greater than the hundreds of billions we've already taken in.
And Lindsay, on top of that, the president talking about other authorities that he's going to use to call for more tariffs, specifically when it comes to Section 301 of the Trade Act, which in large part investigates certain unfair trade practices. There are already some Section 301 investigations into China's semiconductor industry, for instance, so that will certainly be coming down the road. But in large part, these 10% tariffs, the president saying that is going to be put into place in the next few days, Lindsay.
Okay, Willie James Inman, thank you. Let's go ahead and bring in CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. And Jan, I think when you speak, we all listen. And this morning, when you said in the special report, this is one of the most consequential decisions in a modern presidency, I think I can speak for myself when I say I was floored by that analysis. What else can you tell us?
Well, and the reason that is because, as you'd said earlier, this is really kind of the core of President Trump's economic policies. And so the court is putting serious constraints on what he wants to do by saying that this federal statute does not authorize him to impose these sweeping, unlimited tariffs on pretty much every one of our trading partners worldwide. And as Willie said, he's going to now, as President Trump said, do it a different way. The problem with that is that the different way that he now has to follow, he doesn't like as much because there's a cap on that, as Willie said. And so even though that cap is actually lower than what the average of what President Trump was doing under his previous attempt, he had that hammer, Lindsay, where he could threaten to do 25, 35, 40. That was a key negotiating thing for him, he believed. And then also, of course, it's limited, right? It's 5 months and not just endless. So that affects, again, kind of the hammer that he had to try to do some of these deals, trade deals with our partners. But sure, he's going to go ahead with this. As he said, there's other avenues. I thought what was also striking in this was just his tone and how he was actually lashing out at the Supreme Court, suggesting that they were under the influence of foreign interests. Two of those justices in the majority, of course, he nominated. And, you know, this is a court that just 2 years ago in 2024 voted 6-3 that presidents, including President Trump, could not be prosecuted for their official acts while in office. President Trump really liked that decision. And Democrats and liberals were bashing the court, calling the court illegitimate in the pocket of Trump. And so I think what's interesting today is to see this is actually a Supreme Court, 9 justices, all with very different views, many of them on the law, struggling to reach the right answers as they see it, interpreting the Constitution, interpreting federal statutes. And they're not going to make everyone happy. And Trump, this may be in his first big loss this term, but it's not going to be his last. He's going to lose other cases this term, and he's also going to be very unhappy. He may win some, and then the liberals will be unhappy. But that's how our system works.
Called it embarrassing to their families. All right, Jan Crawford. on a marathon day for you. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and bring in CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman. Katrina, one thing that the president mentioned in his remarks that we have also been talking about all day in our coverage is this issue of refunds. The justices didn't really lay out how this is going to go down.
That's right, Lindsay. And what the president said is that he mentioned that it's not discussed in the opinion and said that this will be tied up in court for 5 years. We know people have already been preparing for the potential of this opinion. They have been preparing their lawsuits, getting lawyers, but the only mention of refunds in the opinion was in the dissent that Justice Kavanaugh wrote. And he referenced this. He said the court did not lay out a plan here. Even during the arguments, Justice Amy Coney Barrett had said that it's going to be a mess figuring out these refunds. So they haven't laid out a roadmap, and the president is now saying this is just going to be tied up in litigation for years.
What did you make of all of the different concurrent and dissenting opinions in this? I think some, 170 pages in this decision?
Lindsay, I am still making my way through everything, but I think it shows even though there was unity here with 3 liberal and 3 conservative justices coming together, there were also differences in the reasoning. That's why we have so many different opinions here. So I think that that is very significant what each of them rely on and where they differ. For instance, Chief Justice John Roberts talked a lot about the major questions doctrine, which says that when it comes to matters of economic and political importance, Congress very clearly gives over that authority, and he relied on that a lot in his opinion. Justice Kagan, in her concurrence, said she didn't think that they needed to even go there, that this was just a strict textual analysis. When you look at the words of IEPA, you just cannot interpret it the way that the president wanted to. And then just to add and pick up on what Jan was saying, I think it was so striking, the language that he used when talking about the justices in this press conference. I mean, saying that they were swayed by foreign interest. He called them fools and lapdogs, unpatriotic and disloyal. These are justices, 2 of whom he nominated, who will also be deciding many more consequential opinions for the Trump administration. It was just very surprising to see him lash out at that level at the Supreme Court.
We're not used to hearing that language from a president in regards to the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you. The U.S. takes a giant step toward returning to the moon. We'll break down today's critical dress rehearsal at Cape Canaveral. And after more than 60 years of fighting grease and grime, Mr. Clean is finally hanging up the mop. Why the cleaning brand is saying goodbye to its mascot. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Something that's undeniable.
With mindfulness. Innovative.
Magical.
It's like being a child.
And truly original reporting.
God, you do your research. I tell a good story.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
The 18-year-old soccer sensation igniting worldwide buzz.
How good is this kid?
The defenders are just bewitched. Lamine Yamal.
You ever talk to the soccer ball?
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the Takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity and formality and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who is a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you?
Oh, come on.
Join me on the Takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
You both had talked about going on Survivor together.
Right.
A Survivor contestant believes his sister was murdered.
I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you.
And is determined to be her voice.
This is her speaking to everyone saying, don't let this happen to you.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount+.
Chilling with the queen, her name is Gail King.
Hey!
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning. CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS. CBS Mornings.
I want a mug. Yeah, good mug.
A stalker sends menacing messages to a young mother before she's murdered.
They all just kind of said, I can't believe this happened. He did it. The stalker did it. There's a killer out there, and we're going to go after him.
But the investigation reveals a sinister setup.
I think his head is spinning, thinking about what else are they going to find.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Money Watch is your no-nonsense guide to taking control of your finances, where I offer practical, real-world advice with no jargon and no judgment. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Listen to Money Watch wherever you get your podcasts.
It could be the greatest turnaround in college football history.
What is the magic here?
The undefeated Big Ten champs, Indiana Hoosiers.
CBS Morning. CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS Mornings.
As the desperate search for Nancy Guthrie reaches its 20th day, local police say the case hasn't gone cold. The Pima County Sheriff's Department says it has gotten more than 28,000 calls related to Guthrie's disappearance. Authorities are turning to commercial genealogy companies for DNA leads, as well as Walmart to identify who purchased that backpack worn by the person in the surveillance footage, and tech firms to try and recover additional surveillance video. Let's bring in CBS News reporter Andres Gutierrez from Tucson. Andres, how confident are authorities that one of these leads could produce a break? Are you talking to anybody about where their confidence level is today?
Well, Lindsay, at this point, there have been no significant updates in the last 24 hours. But as you said right off the top, investigators are saying that this case has not gone cold. They are right now actively working every lead that they get. Even though they don't have a suspect in custody, they say they are not out of options. A major focus right now is the DNA evidence that was found inside Nancy Guthrie's house. It is being analyzed and tested. That may take several weeks for it to be complete. It's not believed that DNA inside the home is from Nancy or her family. Remember, the family was cleared earlier this week. Investigators are also continuing to study that doorbell video. It is the single piece of evidence that they have of this individual that they're looking for. They're working to identify and trace the items seen on that man, including that backpack, the gun, and that distinctive holster. Right now, there are more than 400 FBI agents and sheriff deputies who together are working this case, and they believe it could be one piece of evidence or perhaps a call from a tipster that could break this case wide open, Lindsay.
We once again heard from Mexican authorities about this case. What did they say?
Yeah, we ended up hearing from Mexico's top security official today during a news conference. The Mexico's Secretary of Security addressed reports that the FBI had contacted Mexican authorities and whether there had been any